Vice President Vance, before you took your oath of office, you called Donald Trump cultural heroine and America's potential Hitler. Today, you're going to explain to the American people, were you lying then, or are you lying now? The question detonated in the silence of room 2154 of the Rayburn House office building like a flashbang grenade. Every head in the packed hearing room snapped toward the dais where Representative Jasmine Crockett sat ramrod straight, her hands folded over four thick binders that bristled with colored tabs. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in on Vice President JD Vance's face, catching the microsecond where his practiced political smile flickered and died, replaced by something harder, sharper, the look of a man realizing he'd walked into an ambush. It was November 14, 2025, and the House Oversight Committee's special hearing on abuse of office and conflicts of interest in the office of the Vice President was about to make history. The hearing room was standing room only, packed with journalists who'd been tipped off that something significant was coming. The usual Capitol Hill reporters who covered routine congressional hearings had been elbowed aside by heavy hitters from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. Even international press had shown up, BBC, Der Spiegel, Le Monde. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't going to be another toothless congressional performance where politicians postured for clips and nothing changed. Crockett let the silence stretch. It was a lawyer's trick, one she'd learned in her years as a civil rights attorney before coming to Congress. Silence made people uncomfortable. Silence made them fill the void. And on live television, silence was pure gold. Every second of dead air ratcheted up the tension for millions watching at home. 5 seconds. 10. Vance shifted in his seat, the leather creaked audibly in the quiet. Finally, Crockett spoke again, her voice measured and professional. Vice President Vance, thank you for appearing before this committee today. As you know, your testimony here will be given under oath. Do you understand that? I do, Vance replied, his jaw tight. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Then let's begin. Crockett opened the first binder. The sound of the cover hitting the table echoed through the room like a judge's gavel. August 2016. You tweeted, and I quote, "I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him." Do you recall writing that? Vance's lips pressed into a thin line. Representative, I think we all know that people's views can evolve. I'm sorry, Vice President, but that wasn't my question. Crockett's interruption was surgical, precise. My question was, do you recall writing that tweet? Yes or no? The journalists in the gallery leaned forward. This was it. The tone was set, no rambling answers, no filibustering, just receipts. Yes, Vance admitted. Thank you. Crockett made a note. October 2016 NPR interview. You stated, and I'm reading from the transcript, I think Trump is, if not the American Hitler, at least a candidate for it. He's just a really terrible candidate. Did you say that? Yes, but the context. We'll get to context, Vice President. Right now I'm establishing facts. Crockett turned a page. Private text messages, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request and verified as authentic by forensic analysis. November 2016, to a college friend, Trump is a complete idiot. I can't believe people are falling for his act. Did you write that? The room erupted in murmurs. Vance's face flushed red. Those were private communications, which became public record when they were sent from a government device during your Senate campaign, Vice President, and which you haven't denied writing. Crockett closed that tab and opened another. Now, let's talk about what changed, because something significant did change, didn't it? She pulled out a chart, simple, clear, designed for the camera's timeline format. January 2021, you call Trump cultural heroine. April 2022, you meet with Peter Thiel, the billionaire tech investor. May 2022, Thiel agrees to invest $15 million in your Senate campaign. July 2022, you appear on Fox News calling Trump the greatest president of our lifetime. February 2023, Trump endorses you. November 2022, you win your Senate seat. July 2024, Trump selects you as his running mate. Crockett looked up from the chart. Vice President Vance, I'm a simple person from Texas. When I see someone's opinion change 180 degrees after receiving $15 million, I call that getting bought. What do you call it? The room exploded. Reporters hammered at their laptops. Camera flashes strobed. Chairman Miller, a Democrat from California, had to bang his gavel 3 times to restore order. Vance's voice, when he finally spoke, had an edge like broken glass. Representative Crockett, I resent the implication that I can be bought. I came to understand President Trump's policies better. I saw his record in office. You saw $15 million, Crockett replied, her voice remaining level, almost conversational, which somehow made it cut deeper. And I have the receipts to prove it, bank records showing the transfer from Till's PAC to your campaign, calendar records showing you met with Till 7 times between that first meeting and your Fox News appearance, email records, obtained legally through discovery in an unrelated case, where you discussed with campaign advisors what Till needs to hear. She let that land, watching Vance's face cycle through anger, calculation, barely suppressed rage. So let me ask you again, and I want to remind you that you are under oath, did Peter Till's $15 million influence your sudden reversal on Donald Trump? Yes or no? Vance's hands gripped the table. It was a legally disclosed campaign contribution. That is not a yes or no answer, Vice President. And my evolution on Trump was genuine. An evolution that coincidentally happened to be worth exactly $15 million. Crockett made another note. We'll let the American people judge how genuine that sounds. She closed the first binder with deliberate slowness, then placed her hand on the second. The cameras caught it. The gesture was clear, 4 binders, 4 rounds. This was just the opening bell. But we'll come back to the money. Vice President Vance, we have a lot to discuss about money in your office. But first, Crockett paused, and when she spoke again her voice had a new edge. Let's talk about how you talk about women. The second binder opened to reveal a full transcript, highlighted and annotated. Crockett lifted it so the cameras could see the official seal. Fox News Archive, authenticated and certified. September 2021, Tucker Carlson Tonight. You said, and I'm going to read this in full because I want to make sure we have complete context. She cleared her throat and began reading in a measured tone. We are effectively run in this country, via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. How does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? She set the transcript down. Vice President, I'm 43 years old. I don't have children. According to you, should I have a voice in our democracy? Yes or no? Vance shifted. Representative, you're taking that out of context. I was speaking about cultural priorities. Vice President, this is a recording. We have the video. We have the audio. We have the transcript. There is no context that changes what you said. You explicitly stated that people without children don't have a direct stake in America's future. I'm asking you directly, do I, as a childless woman, have a stake in this country's future? Of course you do. Then you were lying when you said we don't. Vance's jaw worked. I was speaking broadly about demographic trends and political incentives. No, Vice President, you were speaking about me, about millions of women like me. 25% of American women over 40 don't have children. That's 20 million women. Are you telling this committee that you believe 20 million American women have less of a stake in our democracy than you do? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Crockett pulled out another document. And it's part of a pattern. May 2022 podcast interview, you suggested people with children should get more votes than people without children. August 2022 rally speech, you said America needs to restore a culture that values family formation over selfish individualism, and you specifically cited women choosing careers over children as an example of that selfishness. October 2023 Senate floor speech, you voted against the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. February 2024, you blocked testimony from sexual assault survivors in a Senate hearing. She looked up. Vice President, I'm trying to find the pattern here. Help me understand. Do you just not like women, or do you just not like women who don't obey your particular vision of what women should be? The gallery gasped. Chairman Miller looked like he wanted to intervene but couldn't find the grounds. Crockett was citing public record, asking questions directly relevant to the hearing's scope. Vance's face had gone from red to white. Representative Crockett, I have the utmost respect for all women. Except the childless ones, and the ones who report sexual assault, and the ones who choose careers, and the ones who don't fit your 1950s vision of American womanhood. Crockett's voice remained professionally neutral, but her words hit like hammer blows. Let me tell you a story, Vice President. Her name is Sarah Chen. She's 39 years old, a math teacher in Columbus, Ohio, your home state, the state you represented in the Senate. Crockett pulled out a letter and held it up. Sarah can't have children. Ovarian cancer diagnosed at 32. Treatment saved her life but destroyed her fertility. She wrote to your Senate office 7 times asking for support on legislation related to fertility treatment coverage. 7 times, Vice President. She never received a single response, not even a form letter. She set Sarah's letter down and picked up another document. But when Michael Stevens, CEO of a tech company with offices in Ohio, emailed your office about cryptocurrency regulation, he got a response in 2 hours, a personal phone call from you within 24 hours, and a meeting scheduled for the following week. Crockett looked directly at Vance. Explain that, Vice President. Explain why a cancer survivor and teacher gets ignored, but a CEO gets the red carpet treatment, and then tell me again how you respect all women. The silence that followed was absolute. Vance opened his mouth, closed it. His communications director seated behind him was frantically writing notes, probably drafting the spin for cable news tonight. 5 seconds of dead air on live television. Then 10. Crockett let it stretch to 15 before speaking again. We'll mark your silence as no answer. Now, Vice President, let's talk about money. The third binder was the thickest. When Crockett opened it, documents spilled across the table, bank records, corporate filings, emails with long strings of forwarded messages and CC'd lawyers. Behind her, a staff member set up an easel with a large poster board. On it was a flowchart, professionally made with boxes and arrows in different colors. Vice President Vance, do you still maintain a financial interest in Narya Capital? Vance's lawyer leaned in to whisper. Vance nodded. My assets are held in a blind trust. Representative, that's not what I asked. Do you maintain a financial interest in Narya Capital? Yes or no? The trust holds certain investments. Yes or no, Vice President? Yes. The word came out like a tooth being pulled. Thank you. And Narya Capital is a venture capital firm co-founded by and primarily funded by Peter Thiel. Correct. Among other investors, Peter Thiel is the primary investor. Yes or no? Yes. And Narya Capital has significant holdings in several defense contractors, including Palantir Technologies and Endural Industries. Correct. I'm not involved in the day-to-day investment decisions. Yes or no, Vice President? Vance's hands clenched. Yes. Crockett stood and walked to the easel, picking up a pointer. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to walk through this slowly because it's important that everyone understands what we're looking at here. She pointed to the first box on the chart. Box 1, Vice President JD Vance. You maintain an estimated $12 million stake in Narya Capital through your blind trust, a trust, I should note, that was set up by lawyers who also represent Peter Thiel. Interesting definition of blind. But we'll move on. The pointer moved to the second box. Box 2, Narya Capital holds $150 million in Palantir stock and $80 million in Endural Industries. Both are defense contractors. Both are companies founded by or heavily funded by Peter Thiel. Third box. March 2025, you, Vice President Vance, attend a meeting at the Pentagon regarding the modernization of border surveillance technology. Present at that meeting, the Secretary of Defense, the head of Customs and Border Protection, and representatives from 3 defense contractors bidding on an $800 million contract. One of those contractors is Endural Industries. Fourth box. April 2025, you send an email, obtained through a separate FOIA request related to the Defense Department's procurement process, to the Secretary of Defense. Subject line, Border Tech Priorities. In it you specifically praise Endural's innovative approach and proven track record. You suggest the Pentagon give serious consideration to their proposal. Fifth box. May 15, 2025, the Pentagon awards the $800 million contract to Endural Industries. Sixth box. May through July 2025, Endural's valuation increases by 40% on the news of the government contract. Narya Capital's stake in Endural jumps from $80 million to $112 million. Your personal stake in Narya, your $12 million, is now worth approximately $16.8 million. Crockett turned from the chart to face Vance directly. Vice President, you personally profited between $4.80 and $8 million from a government contract that you advocated for, awarded to a company in which you hold significant financial interest, funded by the same man who funded your political career. Do you see any problem with that? Vance's lawyer was on his feet. Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous speculation. Counselor, sit down, Chairman Miller snapped. The Vice President can answer the question. Vance's voice was tight. Representative, my financial holdings are managed by an independent trustee. I have no control over. An independent trustee selected by Till's law firm. I have no involvement in investment decisions. You had direct involvement in the contract decision. You advocated for Endural. That was based on policy grounds, the superiority of their technology. Technology you're uniquely qualified to assess as a former venture capitalist with financial ties to the company. Crockett's eyebrow arched. Vice President, I'm a lawyer. Before Congress I spent a decade arguing cases. So let me put this in legal terms, this is textbook corruption. The room erupted again. Republicans on the committee shouted about partisan witch hunts. Democrats demanded order. The gallery was in chaos. Chairman Miller's gavel came down like a gunshot. Order. This committee will have order. When the noise subsided, Crockett was still standing at the easel, pointer in hand, waiting. When she spoke again, her voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. The Emoluments Clause exists for a reason, Vice President. The Constitution prohibits federal officials from receiving payments or benefits from foreign governments without congressional approval. But the principle is broader, public servants should not profit from their public service. That principle is the bedrock of our democracy. She pulled out another document. In 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned after being investigated for taking bribes while governor of Maryland, bribes that continued after he became vice president. The evidence against him was overwhelming: bank records, testimony, a clear pattern of using public office for private gain. Crockett looked at Vance. The evidence here is just as clear. You have financial interests in companies. Those companies bid on government contracts. You advocate for those companies. Those companies win contracts worth hundreds of millions. You profit millions. If that's not corruption, Vice President, then the word has no meaning. Vance had recovered some of his composure. Representative, this is a political prosecution. You're taking routine government functions and spinning them into some kind of conspiracy. No, Vice President, this is congressional oversight. It's written in Article 1 of the Constitution, the document you swore to uphold. She paused. The same document that provides for impeachment of civil officers, including vice presidents, for high crimes and misdemeanors. The word hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Crockett returned to her seat, closed the third binder, and placed her hand on the fourth. But we're not done yet, Vice President, because there's one more thing we need to discuss. January 6, 2021. The atmosphere in the room shifted. This wasn't about policy anymore, or even about money. This was about the heart of American democracy and what had almost been torn out of it. On a cold January day 4 years ago, Crockett began, her voice softer now but somehow more terrible for it. A violent mob attacked the United States Capitol in an attempt to prevent the certification of the 2020 presidential election. 5 people died that day or in its immediate aftermath: Officer Brian Sicknick, Officer Howard Liebengood, Officer Jeffrey Smith, Roseanne Boyland, trampled by the mob, and Ashley Babbitt, shot while breaking through a window toward evacuating members of Congress. She looked up. Where were you that day? Vance seemed surprised by the question. I was in Ohio, Representative. Right. You weren't in the Senate yet, but you had opinions about what happened, didn't you? In fact, you went on television that very evening, Fox News, 9 p.m. Do you remember what you said? I condemned the violence. Did you? Crockett pulled out another transcript. Let me refresh your memory. You said, I understand the frustration. These are people who believe, with good reason, that the election was stolen from them. We can't just dismiss their concerns. Those were your words, Vice President, good reason to believe the election was stolen. She set down the transcript and picked up a legal document. This is a compilation of court decisions regarding challenges to the 2020 election. 63 cases. 63, Vice President, filed in state and federal courts across the country, judges appointed by Democrats and Republicans, judges appointed by President Trump himself. And do you know how many of those cases found evidence of widespread fraud that could have changed the outcome? She paused. 0. Not one. Not a single case. Crockett's voice hardened. So when you said people had good reason to believe the election was stolen, you were either lying or ignorant of readily available facts. Which was it? Representative. There were irregularities. Irregularities that 63 courts found insufficient to change any outcome. Yes or no, do you believe the 2020 election was stolen? Vance's face went carefully blank, the look of a politician who knows he's in a trap. Answer yes and he contradicts every court in America. Answer no and he contradicts the base that put him in office. I believe there were legitimate questions about election procedures. Yes or no, Vice President? Was the 2020 election stolen? It's a simple question. I believe the American people deserve a full accounting. You've had 4 years and 63 court cases. Yes or no, was the election stolen? Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Crockett let it stretch to 30 before speaking again. Your silence speaks volumes, Vice President. But let's continue, because it's not just about what you said that day. It's about what you've said since. She pulled out her phone, tapped it, and audio filled the room, Vance's voice from a podcast interview. If I had been Vice President, I would have told the states that we needed more time to investigate fraud allegations before certifying. Another tap. Another clip. Mike Pence had options. He could have sent the electors back to the states. Another. The January 6th protesters were patriots who felt they had no other choice. Crockett stopped the audio. Vice President, you have repeatedly stated that if you had been in Mike Pence's position on January 6th, you would not have certified the election. Is that correct? I've said that the Vice President has more authority than people realize. To overturn an election. To send them back for further review. There is no constitutional provision for sending back electoral votes, Vice President. You know that. Every constitutional scholar knows that. Mike Pence's own lawyers told him he had no such authority. So when you say you would have done differently, what you're actually saying is that you would have violated your constitutional oath to preserve power for a president who lost an election. Yes or no? Vance's voice rose. I'm saying that the American people deserved better than to have their concerns dismissed. Their concerns were heard, Vice President, by 63 courts, by election officials in every state, including Republican officials in Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, by Trump's own Attorney General who said there was no fraud, by Trump's own cybersecurity director who called it the most secure election in American history and was fired for telling the truth. Crockett stood again, and when she spoke her voice filled the room with quiet fury. Do you know who else had concerns on January 6th, Vice President? Officer Brian Sicknick's family. He was beaten with a fire extinguisher and died of his injuries. Officer Howard Liebengood's family, he died by suicide 4 days after the attack, unable to cope with the trauma. Officer Jeffrey Smith's family, he also died by suicide after sustaining head injuries during the riot. She pulled out 3 photographs and held them up one by one. Brian Sicknick. Howard Liebengood. Jeffrey Smith. These men died because a mob that you called patriots, believed the same lie you've been spreading, that the election was stolen. Crockett set the photos down gently, reverently. Their families are watching this hearing. Vice President, Officer Sicknick's mother is in the gallery right now. Every head turned. In the third row, an elderly woman sat with her hands folded, her face carved from grief and dignity. Crockett's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. What would you like to say to her, Vice President? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Vance's mouth opened, closed. His eyes flicked to the gallery, to Mrs. Sicknick, then away. The violence that day was wrong. I've always said. You called them patriots. I meant the peaceful protesters. There were no peaceful protesters, Vice President. There was a violent mob attempting to overthrow American democracy. And you, from the safety of your home in Ohio, called them patriots while her son lay dying. Mrs. Sicknick's face remained impassive, but a tear tracked slowly down her cheek. Crockett looked back at Vance. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to look at Mrs. Sicknick when you answer. Do you believe the 2020 election was stolen? Yes or no? Every camera in the room swiveled between Vance and the elderly woman in the gallery, the Vice President of the United States and the mother of a fallen Capitol Police officer, connected by a question that would define his legacy. Vance's voice, when it came, was barely audible. There were irregularities that deserved investigation. That's not an answer. I believe we need to ensure election integrity. Yes or no, Vice President? Silence. Crockett let it stretch for a full minute this time, 60 seconds of the Vice President of the United States unable or unwilling to answer a yes or no question about the legitimacy of American democracy. Finally she spoke. Your silence is an answer, Vice President, and it tells us everything we need to know. She closed the fourth binder with a finality that sounded like a cell door slamming shut. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions at this time, but I do have a statement. Chairman Miller nodded. The chair recognizes Representative Crockett for a closing statement. Crockett didn't stand. She didn't need to. The camera was already on her, and her voice carried the weight of 4 hours of evidence, 4 binders of receipts, and the watching eyes of millions of Americans. Vice President Vance, in the past 4 hours this committee has established the following facts. 1. You fundamentally changed your political positions after receiving $15 million from a billionaire benefactor. You went from calling Donald Trump, America's Hitler, to calling him, the greatest president of our lifetime, a transformation that happened to coincide perfectly with the largest campaign contribution of your career. 2. You have repeatedly demeaned and dismissed American women who don't conform to your narrow vision of what women should be. 20 million childless American women, according to your own words, have less of a stake in our democracy than you do. You voted against protections for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And when a cancer survivor from your own state wrote to you 7 times asking for help, you ignored her while rolling out the red carpet treatment for wealthy CEOs. 3. You have profited millions of dollars from your public office through a web of financial entanglements that would make the Founding Fathers weep. You advocated for government contracts awarded to companies in which you hold significant financial interest, managed through a so-called blind trust set up by your benefactors' lawyers. You made between $4.80 and $8 million from a single defense contract, a contract you personally pushed for from your position as Vice President of the United States. 4. You have refused to affirm the legitimacy of the 2020 election despite 63 court decisions, despite the findings of your own party's officials, despite the deaths of police officers who defended the Capitol against a violent mob that believed the same lies you've been spreading. You said you would have done differently than Mike Pence, meaning you would have violated your constitutional oath to preserve power for a president who lost an election. She paused, letting each point land like a judge reading a verdict. Vice President, this is not about politics. This is not about Democrat versus Republican. This is about a pattern of behavior, documented, proven, undeniable, that demonstrates you are unfit for the office you hold. Now, I don't expect you to resign today. People like you never resign. You'll issue a statement calling this a partisan witch hunt. You'll go on friendly cable news shows where they'll let you spin without challenge. You'll fundraise off this hearing, telling your supporters that you're being persecuted for standing up for them. But here's what you need to understand, we have the receipts. Crockett tapped each of the 4 binders in turn. We have the emails. We have the bank records. We have the testimony. We have the court documents. We have the timeline. We have the evidence. And most importantly, we have the Constitution. Impeachment of a sitting vice president is rare, but it's not unprecedented. The framework exists. The constitutional authority is clear. And when the evidence is this overwhelming, when the violations are this flagrant, when the threat to democratic norms is this severe, Congress has not just the right but the duty to act. This committee will be voting on articles of impeachment within 30 days. And those articles will detail every single thing we've discussed here today, every financial transaction, every lie about the election, every abuse of power, every receipt. You think you're going to survive this because you've survived everything else? You think your party will protect you? You think the American people will forget, like they always do, and move on to the next scandal? But this time, Vice President, the receipts won't let you escape. This time there are too many witnesses, too many documents, too much evidence. This time, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and you've been living in the shadows for too long. To the American people watching this, our system still works. Oversight still works. The Constitution still works, but only if we demand it. Only if we hold our elected officials accountable, regardless of party, regardless of politics, regardless of whether it's convenient. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. The explosion was immediate. Before Vance had even left his seat, the clip of Crockett's opening question, "Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" was trending on every social media platform. Within an hour it had been viewed 10 million times. Within 3 hours, 30 million. The cable news networks went into overdrive. CNN ran the full 4-hour hearing on a loop with legal analysts breaking down each revelation. MSNBC brought in former prosecutors who explained in careful legal language why the evidence presented could constitute impeachable offenses. Even Fox News, after an initial hour of trying to spin the hearing as a partisan attack, found themselves struggling with the sheer weight of the documented evidence. You can call it a witch hunt, but it's harder to dismiss bank records, court filings, and the vice president's own words. The clip that went most viral, though, the moment everyone was sharing, discussing, crying over, was the 30 seconds of silence when Vance couldn't answer whether the 2020 election was stolen, with the camera cutting to Mrs. Sicknick's face, stoic and grieving in the gallery. He couldn't even look at her, read one tweet with 2.3 million likes. He couldn't look at the mother of a man who died because of his lies. Within 48 hours, #Crockett receipts, and the receipt session were the #1 trending topics in the United States. Late-night comedians dedicated entire monologues to it. Saturday Night Live bumped their planned cold open to recreate the hearing, with the actors playing Crockett delivering the "Were you lying then or are you lying now?" line to an explosion of applause. But it wasn't just liberals celebrating. 3 Republican members of the Oversight Committee, from Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, states that had suffered through 2 years of false election fraud claims, issued a joint statement saying they had serious questions that require serious answers. By the end of the first week, the White House was in crisis mode. Vance's communications team released a lengthy statement denying all wrongdoing, claiming the blind trust eliminated any conflicts of interest, and accusing Democrats of weaponizing congressional oversight. But the statement was careful to avoid addressing most of the specific allegations. They couldn't deny the emails, those were authenticated. They couldn't deny the bank records, those were public filings. They couldn't deny Vance's own words, those were recorded. The polling was devastating. A CNN poll released 10 days after the hearing showed 62% of Americans believed Vance had serious ethical problems, including 23% of Republicans. His approval rating had cratered to 28%, lower than any vice president since Dan Quayle. More significantly, the poll showed 47% of Americans supported impeachment proceedings, including 12% of Republicans. Those numbers were enough to make vulnerable Republicans nervous about the 2026 midterms. By week 2, the Department of Justice announced it was opening an investigation into potential conflicts of interest and violations of federal ethics laws. The announcement was carefully worded. The DOJ emphasized that an investigation did not imply guilt, but everyone understood what it meant. When Congress makes a formal referral backed by this level of documentation, the Justice Department has to respond. The financial markets responded too. Narya Capital's portfolio companies saw their stocks drop as investors worried about political blowback. Anduril in particular faced scrutiny over whether their government contract was awarded fairly or was tainted by corruption. The Pentagon announced an internal review of the procurement process, and 3 members of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee called for the contract to be suspended pending investigation. By week 3, the fractures within the Republican Party began to show. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, always attuned to political winds, made a carefully calibrated statement that all allegations of ethical violations should be taken seriously, and that he looked forward to reviewing the evidence. It wasn't an endorsement of impeachment, but it wasn't a defense of Vance either, and coming from McConnell, that silence was deafening. Two Republican senators, both retiring and therefore insulated from primary challenges, went further, explicitly calling for Vance to clear his name or consider whether he can effectively serve. The House moved forward with drafting articles of impeachment. The Oversight Committee worked with the Judiciary Committee and the House Counsel's office to craft a document that was legally airtight. They'd learned from past impeachments, this wasn't going to be about vague abuse of power. These articles cited specific statutes, specific violations, specific evidence. Article 1, Conflicts of Interest and Corruption, detailed timeline of Vance's financial interests, his advocacy for contracts benefiting those interests, and the profits he derived, supported by bank records, emails, corporate filings, and the viral timeline chart. Article 2, Undermining Democratic Processes, documentation of Vance's false claims about the 2020 election, his statements that he would not have certified the results, and his characterization of January 6 insurrectionists as patriots, supported by video/audio recordings, transcripts, and testimony about the impact of such rhetoric on political violence. Article 3, Abuse of Office and Violation of Oath, evidence that Vance used his position to benefit private interests and failed to uphold his constitutional duty to support legitimate democratic processes, supported by comprehensive documentation from Articles 1 and 2. The articles were released publicly with 227 co-sponsors, every Democrat in the House and 6 Republicans. The 6 were all from swing districts, all facing tough re-election fights, all calculating that supporting accountability might play better than defending Vance. Within the White House the panic was setting in. President Trump, always focused on loyalty above all else, initially stood by Vance, but his support was notably lukewarm. "He's doing a fine job," Trump told reporters. "All of this is just another Democrat witch hunt." But Trump didn't attack Crockett by name, didn't rage tweet about the hearing, didn't hold a press conference to vigorously defend his vice president. Those close to Trump reported he was furious about the negative coverage and was privately blaming Vance for being sloppy and getting caught. There were whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that Trump's team was quietly exploring whether there was any precedent for a president replacing a vice president midterm. Vance himself largely disappeared from public view. His office released periodic statements, but he stopped doing interviews, stopped appearing at public events, stopped engaging with the media. Every public appearance would just generate more questions about the hearing, more clips of him looking uncomfortable, more comparisons between his confident pre-hearing statements and his halting, evasive testimony under oath. The impeachment vote was scheduled for mid-December. The whip counts showed it would likely pass the House, the Democratic majority plus the handful of Republicans who'd signed on guaranteed that. But the Senate was a different story. Conviction would require a 2/3 majority, 67 votes. Even if every Democrat voted to convict, not guaranteed, they'd need at least 18 Republicans to join them. That seemed unlikely. But then again, a month ago a serious impeachment effort against the sitting vice president had seemed unlikely. Things were moving fast. 6 weeks after the hearing, where did things stand? JD Vance remained Vice President of the United States, but he was a ghost haunting the White House, politically toxic, unable to travel without protesters, unable to speak without being heckled with shouts of, "Show us the receipts." His political future was effectively over. No one was talking about him as a presidential candidate anymore. If Trump won re-election in 2028, there was zero chance Vance would be on the ticket. The impeachment vote was approaching. The House would almost certainly impeach. The Senate outcome was uncertain, but even if Vance survived, he would be only the 3rd vice president in American history to be impeached by the House. That stain would never wash off. The DOJ investigation was ongoing, with subpoenas being issued for financial records and witness testimony. Federal prosecutors don't move fast, but they move thoroughly. If the evidence supported criminal charges for corruption or ethics violations, those charges could come, though likely not until after the impeachment process concluded. And Jasmine Crockett? She became a star overnight. The phone in her congressional office rang constantly with interview requests from national media. Within the Democratic Party there was suddenly talk of her as a future leader, maybe a run for Senate, maybe a position in party leadership, maybe even a future presidential candidate. "She's what the party needs," one strategist told Politico. "Someone who can fight with facts, someone who doesn't back down, someone who respects institutions while demanding accountability." But when reporters asked Crockett about her political future, she demurred. I'm focused on doing my job, she told CNN. Oversight, accountability, making sure the system works the way it's supposed to work. That's not about my career. That's about our democracy. In her office late one evening after another marathon day of constituent meetings and media interviews, Crockett sat alone with the 4 binders from the hearing. She opened them one by one, running her fingers over the tabs, the highlighted sections, the sticky notes her staff had attached with additional context. Each binder represented months of work, thousands of hours from her team, young staffers who believed in public service, who stayed late and came in on weekends because they believed it mattered. Thousands of pages of documents obtained through FOIA requests, subpoenas, court filings, investigative journalism, and old-fashioned legal research. She thought about Sarah Chen, the math teacher with ovarian cancer who'd written 7 unanswered letters. After the hearing, Sarah had called Crockett's office crying, saying, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for making him see me." She thought about Mrs. Sicknick sitting in that gallery with the dignity of someone who'd sacrificed everything and refused to let that sacrifice be diminished or forgotten. She thought about the millions of Americans who'd watched the hearing and felt, maybe for the first time in years, that their government could still work, that accountability wasn't dead, that the receipts still mattered. Her phone buzzed, a text from a constituent in Texas, "Thank you for representing us. This is the first time in years I've felt hopeful. Keep fighting." Crockett picked up the binders and placed them carefully in her briefcase. There was more work to do. The impeachment vote was coming. The DOJ investigation would need congressional support. And there were already whispers of other officials, other conflicts of interest, other abuses of power that needed investigation. The receipts had spoken in Vance's case. But there were more receipts to be found, more powerful people to hold accountable, more work to be done to restore faith in American democracy. Justice took time. But when you had the evidence, when you had the courage, when you had the conviction to stand up in front of the cameras and the powerful and simply read the facts, justice could still happen. Not always quickly. Not always completely. But it could still happen. Crockett turned off her office light and headed home. Tomorrow the work would continue. Because the receipts were in. And in the end, the receipts always win. You just watched 4 hours of evidence. Now the question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to share this video, or are you going to scroll past it like every other scandal? Are you going to comment below and demand accountability, or are you going to stay silent while people like Vance laugh at the system? They're counting on your apathy. They're betting that you'll watch this, feel righteously angry for 10 minutes, and then forget about it, that in a week nobody will remember, that in a month they'll still be sitting in positions of power, pockets full of cash, without a shred of remorse. Prove them wrong. Share this video, not, "I'll do it later," not, "I'll watch it again first." Share it right now. Tag 10 people, not 2, not 5, 10 people who need to see these receipts. Call your representative. The Capitol switchboard number is 20222243121. Say 4 words, "I demand an impeachment vote." If you're not going to do all 3 of those things, then don't pretend you want change. Don't comment, "This makes me sick," and then do nothing. Don't react with an angry emoji and then scroll down to cat videos. Don't say, "Somebody should do something," somebody is you. 60 seconds. 3 actions. Or admit you're part of the problem. I'm waiting. My receipts are here. Where are yours? Comment "Done" when you've shared plus tagged plus called. Or comment "Excuse" and tell me why you're too busy to save democracy. The clock is ticking. Vance is laughing. Which side are you on?